need to listen to me. All of you listening right now, because I don't know how much time I have left. Every second feels like a grain of sand slipping through my fingers, or worse, like the grind of two tectonic plates, slowly, inexorably tearing apart. And what's happening here? It's not just bad, it's beyond anything you could ever imagine. Beyond sanity. I took a job, a stupid, desperate, impossible job, a lighthouse keeper. Sounds simple, right? Romantic even. Salty air, crashing waves, the serene isolation of the sea. But there are no waves here, no ocean, not a single ripple of anything but silence. Just trees. Miles and miles of dense, suffocating ancient trees that stretch in every direction like a black, tangled carpet. And a lighthouse, a towering, grotesque stone monstrosity rooted deep in the heart of a forest that feels like it's been forgotten by time, by God, by everything. I should have known better. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back the second I saw the ad, the second I confirmed the address, the second I felt that cold, clammy dread creep up my spine like an icy spider. But I was desperate, so desperately, cripplingly desperate. And now I'm trapped. Here. And the rules. God, the rules are starting to unravel me. It all started the way most cataclysmic mistakes do, with a flicker of hope in the absolute darkest hour. My life, at that point, was a ruin. Not a slow, gentle decay, but a violent, implosive collapse. The kind where you wake up each morning and the air itself feels heavy with the weight of impending doom. Laid off from a job I hated but desperately needed, my meager savings had dwindled to a terrifying trickle. Each outgoing payment a chisel chip from the last vestiges of my future. The eviction notice on my door wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a physical threat, a countdown to homelessness. My old car, a relic from a more optimistic time, rattled and groaned like an asthmatic ghost clinging to life by a thread. I was a ghost too, really. Just a shadow of the person I used to be, haunted by the specter of what I was becoming. I remember the exact moment. It was 3 a.m, the harsh blue glow of my laptop screen illuminating my gaunt face. The stale air in my apartment, thick with the smell of desperation and cheap instant coffee. I was scrolling through the most obscure, forgotten corners of the internet, past the legitimate job boards, past the obvious scams, delving into the murky depths where dignity went to die. Any odd job, I told myself. Anything to keep my head above water just for another week, another day. And then I stumbled upon it. It was tiny, almost invisible, buried under pages of spam, pyramid schemes, and questionable offers for financial freedom. A classified ad. Small text, no bolding, no graphics. It simply read, "Lighthouse Keeper Wanted. Remote. Excellent remuneration. Inquire within for unique opportunity." No company name, no contact number, just a P.O. box address. It looked like it had been handwritten, then scanned, the smudges on the virtual paper hinting at ink, or maybe something else. Something I couldn't quite identify, a faint brownish stain. It was ridiculous. A lighthouse. In the middle of nowhere, given the P.O. box was in a town so small it barely registered on a map. It screamed scam, cult, or a very elaborate, cruel joke. But the excellent remuneration part, that was the hook. That was the tiny, gleaming, utterly irresistible lure. My desperation was a gaping maw, and that ad was a dangling, if suspiciously wriggling worm. I swallowed it whole. I sent a terse, professional as I could manage email to the given address. My fingers trembled as I typed, the words feeling utterly hollow, a plea sent into the void. "Regarding your ad for a lighthouse keeper," I wrote, "I am highly motivated, reliable, and available immediately." It was a lie. I was a husk, driven only by primal fear. I clicked send, half expecting it to bounce back, half expecting a phishing scam to infect my system. A week later, a heavy, unmarked envelope arrived at my door. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in that same elegant, almost calligraphic script from the ad. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside, there was no letter, no contract, no human explanation. Just a single, crudely drawn map on brittle, yellowed parchment that felt oddly dry, like old skin, and a key. A large, ornate, black iron key that felt impossibly old and heavy in my palm, its cold metal radiating an ancient, almost magnetic chill. And again, a single line of that unnerving script on a separate slip of paper. The journey begins where the road ends. That was it. No interview, no background check, no human contact. Just this. A map to a place that shouldn't exist and a key to unlock whatever lay there. My rational mind, the tiny screaming voice of reason still clinging to life within me, shrieked. My gut churned with a primal warning, a deep-seated revulsion that curdled my blood. But my empty wallet, the gnawing pit of financial despair, whispered louder. It promised salvation, a way out. I ignored the screaming and listened to the whisper. The drive was an odyssey, not a journey, but a descent. Days of it. My old sputtering sedan ate up highway miles with an almost suicidal determination, then coughed its way down gravel roads that became increasingly rutted and neglected. Eventually, those gave way to narrow dirt tracks, barely visible beneath a carpet of decaying leaves and pine needles, tracks that felt more like ancient animal trails than human passages. The trees started to crowd in, their ancient limbs gnarled and interwoven, forming a canopy so thick that the sun became a forgotten memory, leaving the world in a perpetual, bruised twilight. The air grew heavy, damp, thick with the smell of wet earth, decaying vegetation, and something else, something metallic and vaguely stagnant, like old blood mixed with iron ore. It was an oppressive quiet, a suffocating blanket of silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart, the labored breath of my failing engine, and the crunch of my tires on the decaying leaves and twigs. GPS died miles back, of course. My phone, a useless brick, had long since lost any signal, its screen a mocking black mirror to my growing despair. I was utterly, completely alone, driving into the maw of an unknown that felt increasingly hostile, increasingly alive. Each mile deepened the sense of being untethered, drifting further and further from everything familiar, everything safe. The forest pressed in, an endless, voiceless wall of green-black, its stillness more terrifying than any storm. And then, just as the last vestiges of twilight were fading, and a pervasive, unnatural gloom settled, just as I thought I'd finally made a terrible, fatal mistake, just as despair threatened to overwhelm me completely, I saw it. Through a sudden, unnatural clearing in the oppressive forest, a clearing that felt carved out, not grown naturally, it loomed. Not a quaint, charming coastal beacon, a friendly guide for lost ships. Number. This was a monolithic, Gothic sentinel, the Lighthouse. It rose from the forest floor like a petrified giant, its stone cold and dark, draped in ancient, clinging moss and thick, ropey vines that looked less like vegetation and more like calcified veins, pulsating faintly in the fading light. It was taller than any lighthouse I'd ever seen, impossibly slender, almost predatory in its silhouette against the bruised, darkening sky. And there was no ocean, just an endless, silent sea of trees, a vast, unbroken expanse of green-black gloom stretching to the horizon in every direction, absorbing the last whispers of light. The sheer, gut-wrenching absurdity of it hit me with the force of a physical blow. A lighthouse in the woods. My brain struggled, convulsed, trying to reconcile the image, the concept, with reality. It felt like a fever dream, a forgotten myth made manifest, something ripped from the deepest, darkest parts of a primordial nightmare. A narrow, winding path, barely visible beneath a thick carpet of decaying leaves, led to a heavy, wrought iron gate rusted into immobility. The ornate black iron key in my hand, the one from the envelope, felt impossibly right as I slid it into a lock that looked like it hadn't been turned in a century. It groaned, a mournful, metallic cry that scraped along my nerves as I pushed it open. Beyond it, a small, overgrown clearing, and then the base of the lighthouse itself. It had a small, squat building attached to its side, clearly the keeper's quarters, but it looked less like a home and more like a tomb. No windows on the ground floor, just thick, solid stone, as if designed to keep something in as much as to keep something out. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a desperate bird trying to escape its cage. This was it. This was where my desperate choice had led me. I pulled my bag from the car, the last tether to a sanity I was rapidly losing, the only thing connecting me to the world I'd left behind, and stepped across the threshold. The gate, as if on cue, groaned shut behind me, the sound of metal on metal echoing through the oppressive silence. A final, definitive clang. And that's when I found them. Tacked to the inside of the heavy oak door leading into the keeper's quarters, illuminated by the dying, murky light filtering through a high, narrow window, was a single sheet of yellowed paper, and on it, scrawled in that same faded, looping script, were the rules. 8 rules. Rules that, even then, before I truly understood them, before I knew what they truly meant, sent a shiver of ice through my very bones, down to the marrow. And believe me, when I tell you they're strange, I mean a level of strange that doesn't just defy logic. It actively warps reality. They've been here with me ever since, my only company. And they are the reason I am telling you this, the reason I might not make it through the night, the reason you need to listen. The yellowed paper, brittle as ancient skin, crackled faintly as my trembling fingers traced the faded script. The air in the small, stone-walled antechamber was cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth, stagnant water, and something else, something indescribably old, like dust that had never been disturbed, infused with forgotten fears. The light filtering through the high, narrow window was dying, turning the written words into faint, dancing shadows. But they were legible, and they were a promise of something truly, irrevocably wrong. I remember each one, burned into my mind, etched into my very being, because they are the framework of my prison, the laws of this unholy place. Rule 1, the light must never go out. My first thought, a fleeting flicker of sanity, was an ironic chuckle. Well, obviously, I muttered to the silence. It's a lighthouse. But then the full crushing weight of reality descended, suffocating me. This wasn't by the sea. This wasn't for ships. This was a lighthouse in the middle of a primeval, impenetrable forest. What exactly was this light meant to illuminate? Or more terrifyingly, what was it meant to repel? The absurdity curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread in my stomach. What was out there in the suffocating black of those woods that required a beacon of this magnitude? My first task, I realized, was to ascend. The stairs to the lamp room spiraled upwards, a dizzying helix of cold, damp stone. Each step groaned under my weight, echoing eerily in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder, heavier, saturated with the smell of wet rock, faint mildew, and a metallic tang that made my teeth ache. I could almost taste the age of the structure, the countless years it had stood here, silent sentinel in the heart of nothingness. My breath plumed in the chill air, each exhale a visible testament to my rising fear. Finally, I reached the top. The lamp room was vast, circular, dominated by an enormous antique Fresnel lens. It gleamed faintly in the encroaching gloom, a monstrous, multifaceted eye. The mechanism was a marvel of ancient engineering, cogs and gears of impossibly old brass and iron, coated in a fine, greasy dust. A large diesel generator stood in one corner, its fuel tank surprisingly full. My fingers brushed the cold, smooth glass of the lens, a shiver running through me. This was it, the heart of the lighthouse, the thing that kept something at bay. With a deep, shaky breath, I followed the crude diagram left beside the generator, a diagram that felt less like an instruction manual and more like a ritualistic glyph. I primed the old engine, pulled the cord. It coughed, sputtered, and then, with a deep, rumbling groan that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones, it roared to life. The hum filled the room, a low, guttural vibration that was almost a comfort in the overwhelming silence. And then, with a clunk and a whir, the lamp ignited. A blinding beam of pure, incandescent light burst forth, slicing through the gathering darkness. The lens began its slow, deliberate rotation, casting its powerful beam out into the endless, silent sea of trees. The light, it was magnificent, terrifying. It swept across the canopy, cutting through the dense foliage, illuminating nothing but more trees. Ancient, gnarled trunks stretching into an inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light at its edges. There was no horizon, no distant glimmer of a town, no other sign of human habitation, just the infinite, oppressive forest. And for the first time, a truly visceral fear bloomed in my chest. This light wasn't for navigation. It was a barrier, a shield. And I, the new keeper, was its guardian. It meant there was something worth keeping out, something that needed to be illuminated, held at bay by the raw power of pure light. The thought curdled in my gut. What was out there, shrouded in the depths of that perpetual gloom that required such a constant, relentless ward? The thought made the hair on my arms stand on end, prickling with a primal warning. I felt impossibly exposed, a solitary sentinel illuminated in the vast, watching darkness. I descended the stairs, the low hum of the generator, a constant, unnerving drone in the background. The keeper's quarters were Spartan, cold, and utterly impersonal. A sturdy wooden table, 2 chairs, a small cot with a thin mattress in a recessed alcove. A primitive, wood-burning stove for heat, its chimney pipe disappearing into the thick stone wall. No personal effects, no photographs, no lingering scent of a previous inhabitant. It was clean, meticulously so, but it felt less like a home and more like a temporary holding cell or a tomb. Everything was made of thick, rough-hewn timber or cold, unforgiving stone. There were no modern amenities beyond the generator-powered light bulb flickering above the table. No running water, just a hand pump at a dry well outside. No electricity for anything else, no radio, no television, no phone signal. I was cut off, utterly, completely. The silence without the generator's hum was absolute, a suffocating, crushing silence that pressed in on my ears, making them ring. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of unseen things, unsaid words, unheard movements. I unpacked my meager belongings, the familiar scent of my old clothes, a fleeting comfort in the alien environment. The cot was hard, the air growing colder as the last vestiges of natural light faded. I lit a small oil lamp, its flickering glow chasing the shadows back into the corners, but not quite banishing them. The light from the tower pulsed rhythmically through the high, narrow window, a slow, hypnotic sweep across the ceiling, then across the floor, then gone, plunging the room into relative darkness before returning. It was like a giant, cyclopean eye, perpetually winking at me, or watching me. I decided to try and read the other rules, hoping that logic, some kind of sanity, would assert itself. It didn't. Rule 2, you are not alone. Never speak their name. This rule hit me like a physical blow. A cold wave of dread washed over me, chilling me to the bone. You are not alone. The words seemed to hover in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. They. Who were they? The silence in the room suddenly intensified, becoming a tangible presence. Every creak of the old timbers, every groan of the ancient stone, every rustle of the dry leaves outside the door became magnified, distorted, imbued with a sinister life of their own. I held my breath, straining my ears, listening so hard that my head began to throb. Nothing. And yet, everything. It wasn't a sound I heard, not at first. It was a feeling, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air pressure, like someone had just entered the room behind me, displacing the atmosphere. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My skin prickled with goose flesh. I slowly turned, my muscles tense, my eyes darting into the shadowed corners of the room. Nothing. The oil lamp cast its wavering glow, illuminating only empty space. But the feeling persisted, the distinct, overwhelming sensation of being watched, not just from outside, but from within these very walls. A faint scratching sound like fingernails on rough stone. It came from the wall, next to the cot. I froze, my breath hitched in my throat. My eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the spot. Silence. Then it came again. Scritch, scritch, slow, deliberate, methodical. My rational mind screamed. It's the house settling. Old wood, old stone, animals outside maybe, in the walls. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal part, knew it wasn't. This wasn't a mouse. This was deliberate and close. I hugged my knees to my chest, pulling my thin blanket tighter around me, as if it could offer protection from an unseen threat. My gaze kept darting to the black, ornate iron key I'd found with the map. It lay on the table, glinting faintly in the oil lamplight, heavy with unspoken secrets. I felt a desperate urge to run, to sprint out into the all-encompassing darkness of the forest, to abandon this insane job and whatever horrors lurked within. But the gate had grown shut behind me. I hadn't even thought to check if it locked from the inside. And the car, it was parked outside the gate, miles from any semblance of civilization. I was truly, utterly trapped. The excellent remuneration felt like blood money now. As the hours dragged on, the subtle incidents multiplied. A distant whisper, so faint it could have been the wind, but the air was still, utterly breathless. It sounded like a name being breathed, just at the edge of hearing, teasing, tormenting. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block it out. Cold spots, patches of frigid air that would drift through the room, chilling me, even near the warm glow of the oil lamp. They moved. They didn't dissipate. They would glide past me, distinct and unnatural, making me shiver violently. I felt a pressure on my chest, like a great weight, crushing the air from my lungs. A profound sense of suffocating melancholy descended, an invading despair that felt alien, not my own. Never speak their name. The warning echoed in my mind. Whatever was here, whatever they were, they listened, they reacted, and I was their captive audience. I forced myself to get up, to move, to break the paralyzing spell. I paced the small room, rubbing my arms, trying to generate warmth, trying to shake off the invasive dread. My eyes kept straying to the paper, drawn by a terrible fascination, a morbid curiosity. Rule 3. Do not look out after midnight. Not from the tower, not from the windows. This rule, more than the others, sent a jolt of raw terror through me. Midnight. The witching hour. What horrors stirred in the endless, light-eating darkness of the forest after the world outside had truly gone to sleep? What was so terrible, so soul-shattering, that it couldn't be seen? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. The light from the tower continued its relentless sweep. Whoosh, light, whoosh, dark, whoosh, light. Each pulse of illumination felt like a brief reprieve, a tiny moment of safety before the looming darkness returned. I checked my watch. 11:37 p.m. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the unknown. I found myself drawn to the high, narrow window, my body moving without my conscious command, pulled by a perverse, terrible curiosity. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to look, desperately, to glimpse whatever unspeakable thing this rule was trying to hide from me, to understand. But the fear was stronger, a deep, primal terror that rooted me to the spot, just out of direct line of sight from the glass. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, my eyes wide, fixed on the window. A heavy thud echoed from outside. Not a branch falling, not an animal. Something heavy, something moving with purpose. Then a low guttural groan, deep and resonant, that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the lighthouse. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something ancient, something vast. The sound seemed to come from directly beneath the window, right outside. A faint, earthy smell wafted in, something fungal, like wet soil mixed with something putrid, metallic. It was sickening. My knuckles were white as I pressed them against the rough stone. Every fiber of my being screamed to look, to just peek, just a tiny glance. But the rule was a chain binding me. Do not look out after midnight. What would happen if I did? Would I see something that would shatter my mind? Would it see me? The pervasive feeling of being watched intensified, pressing in from all sides. I could almost feel a cold, slick surface pressing against the glass, just beyond my perception, a vast, unblinking eye staring into the dimness of the keeper's quarters. Waiting. My throat was dry. My mouth tasted of ash. The minutes crawled by, each second an eternity, punctuated by the rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam and the unseen, unholy presence lurking just beyond the glass. Midnight was only minutes away, and I was trapped with the rules, trapped with them. The digital numbers on my wristwatch blurred, swimming in the dim lamplight. 11:58 p.m. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The guttural groan from outside had ceased, replaced by a profound, unnatural silence that felt heavier, more expectant than before. The smell of wet earth and something putrid thickened, clinging to the air like a shroud. I pressed myself harder against the cold stone, my muscles trembling, my eyes locked on the narrow, dark rectangle of the window. My mind screamed at me to look, to satisfy the morbid curiosity that gnawed at my sanity, to unveil the terror lurking just beyond the glass. But the rule, etched in fading ink on the yellowed paper, was a desperate warning. Do not look out after midnight. What would happen if I did? Would my eyes be seared? Would my mind shatter? Or would it see me? Would it know I had defied its silent decree? The sweep of the lighthouse beam felt slower now, more deliberate. Whoosh, light. Whoosh, dark. The moments stretched, each one an eternity of agonizing suspense. 11:59 p.m. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. My throat was dry, my tongue thick with the taste of fear. Then, a low, resonating thrum began to vibrate through the stone floor, rising from deep beneath the earth, a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to my bones. It was a sound of immense power, of something ancient and vast stirring from a long slumber. The air grew frigid, a sudden sharp drop in temperature that sent shivers racking through my body, independent of my fear. The oil lamp on the table flickered violently, its flame dancing wildly as if trying to escape an unseen draft. And then, 12 a.m. midnight. The thrum intensified, becoming a low, continuous rumble like a colossal, living engine buried deep below the earth. It vibrated through my teeth, rattled the very marrow in my bones. And then the sound changed. It wasn't a groan anymore, or a thud. It was a wet, sucking noise, like something immense being dragged through thick, viscous mud, or something heavy being peeled from a slick surface. Schlurk, schlurk. It was coming from right outside the window, and then a series of softer, scraping sounds, like scales or rough hide, being pulled across the rough stone of the lighthouse exterior, slowly, methodically, moving upwards, closer to the window, closer to me. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, desperate to block out the horrifying symphony, desperate to avoid the temptation to look. The pressure in the room built, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. I could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent intelligence, just inches away, on the other side of the glass. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. It stayed there, scraping, sucking, thrumming, until the first faint sliver of pre-dawn light began to filter through the cracks in the walls. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. The silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It was a silence that knew, a silence that remembered. And it left me utterly, irrevocably changed. My eyes, bloodshot and stinging from lack of sleep and terror, drifted back to the rules, as if they held some key, some explanation for the unspeakable things that had just transpired. Rule 4. Always keep a light source on you, even if the main light is working. This rule, which at first had seemed like simple common sense, now took on a sinister new meaning, even if the main light is working. The implication struck me with the force of a blow. Sometimes it wouldn't be. Or, even more chillingly, there were things in this place that the colossal beam of the lighthouse couldn't ward off. Things that thrived in shadows even the brightest light couldn't pierce. My eyes darted to the generator gauge. It showed full, constant power. The steady hum of the mechanism above reassured me for a fleeting moment. But as I stared, the light from the tower, which pulsed rhythmically through the high window, stuttered. Just a blink. A momentary flicker, a dimming of the powerful beam like a giant cyclopean eye winking. Then it returned, bright and strong as before. But the brief, agonizing fraction of a second when the light faltered was enough. It was enough for the air in the room to turn instantly, bone-chillingly cold, as if some unseen presence had just breathed down my neck. It was enough for a sudden, crushing weight to press down on my chest, sucking the air from my lungs. A profound, consuming fear, not my own, washed over me. A feeling of abject terror so potent it made my legs buckle. I scrambled, fumbling for the oil lamp I'd used earlier, pulling it close, wrapping my fingers around its warm glass base. Its small personal glow felt like a pitiful shield against a boundless, devouring darkness. The flicker had only lasted an instant, but the residual chill remained, sinking into my bones. The fear, too, lingered, a cold residue in my gut. I understood now. This rule wasn't about power outages. It was about vulnerability, about knowing that even the greatest light here could be, for a terrifying moment, extinguished. And in that moment, something could slip through. Something could find its way in. I clutched the lamp tightly, the small, flickering flame my only comfort, my only perceived defense against whatever unspeakable things lurked in the fleeting moments of darkness. As the first weak light of dawn began to seep into the forest, painting the oppressive trees in hues of bruised violet and gray, I felt a desperate need to understand more. The scratching, the groaning, the presence from the night had not left me. They had simply retreated like a tide, only to return. I forced myself to examine the next rule, each word a new, terrifying discovery. Rule 5. Do not acknowledge anything that approaches the gate after sunset, unless it has a light source of its own that matches the tower. This one sent a fresh wave of ice through me. The gate. The heavy wrought iron gate I had pushed open, which had groaned shut behind me. Approaches the gate. Not just things in the woods, things that came to the gate. Human, animal, or something else entirely. And the crucial qualifier, unless it has a light source of its own that matches the tower. This meant two things. Firstly, there could be visitors. And secondly, those visitors were defined not by appearance, or voice, or humanity, but by a specific, terrifying criterion, the presence of an identical, pulsing light. What kind of person or thing would carry a replica of the lighthouse's unique beacon? And what kind of entity would approach the gate without it? The rule's ambiguity was as terrifying as its direct command. What happens if you do acknowledge them? What happens if you don't? That evening, as the sun dipped below the impenetrable tree line and the oppressive gloom descended once more, I sat by the small high window, straining my eyes through the gathering darkness. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I heard it first, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle just beyond the gate. Then a low, drawn-out scrape, like something heavy being dragged along the forest floor. It was followed by a series of soft, deliberate clicks, as if something with many small, hard limbs was trying to navigate the uneven ground. It wasn't the sound of a deer or a bear. This was something different, something methodical. My eyes, wide and unblinking, stared into the blackness. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the trees, moving slowly towards the gate. It was indistinct, formless in the pervasive gloom, but it was definitely there. Humanoid in height, perhaps, but too wide, too lurching in its gait. And it had no light. No piercing beam, no faint lantern, nothing, just a void, moving against a darker void. It reached the gate, and I heard a faint, rasping sound like dry breath catching in a withered throat. A low, insistent tap against the wrought iron. Then another, and another. Slow, persistent, waiting. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes, clamping my hands over my mouth to prevent any sound escaping. My entire being screamed to run, to hide, to scream. But I forced myself to remain still, frozen in place, my gaze fixed on the empty space where the shadow had been, refusing to acknowledge it. The tapping continued for what felt like an eternity, a steady, maddening rhythm that burrowed into my skull. It was a test, a silent, terrifying test. My limbs ached with the effort of holding still. My eyes burned. My throat was raw. And then, finally, with a heavy, dragging sigh, the tapping ceased. I heard the faint shlook again, the sound of something retreating back into the endless, light-eating blackness of the woods. I didn't dare move. Not for a long, long time. The gate remained a dark silhouette against the barely visible forest, a barrier that seemed less to keep things out, and more to keep me in. My new reality was slowly, agonizingly, conforming to the chilling geometry of these 8 impossible rules. My mind, I feared, would soon follow. It's 3 a.m. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The rules. They're not just rules. They're the fabric of this horror tightening around me, choking the very breath from my lungs. I can hear it now, a low, rhythmic thump-thump from the woods, closer than it's ever been, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. And the light, the main light, it just flickered, a long, agonizing blink in the eye of this cursed place. I'm alone here, completely, trapped. But I had to tell you, someone, anyone, before it's too late. Before I become just another forgotten keeper, another shadow swallowed by these ancient, hungry woods. Before they find me. Do you believe me? Because this isn't a story. This is my reality. And I don't think I have much of it left. What would you do? How would you survive? Share your thoughts. Just please, never look for this place. Never go into the woods where the road ends.